You felt it for years, haven't you? That quiet exhaustion that creeps in after every conversation. The invisible weight that settles on your chest whenever someone near you begins to fall apart. You call it empathy, but deep down, some part of you suspects it's something else. Carl Jung once wrote that the light of the empath often hides a dangerous contract. He meant that behind compassion's radiance lies an unconscious bargain, a psychological agreement you never knew you signed. A contract written in the language of childhood survival. You were a child who could read the room like a book. You could feel tension before anyone spoke. When voices rose, your body stiffened. When sadness filled the air, your heart raced to fix it. And every time you succeeded, every time peace returned, someone smiled. That smile became your proof that love could be earned, that peace could be purchased with your energy. That was the beginning of the shadow contract. Jung saw this pattern again and again in his clinical work. He described patients who could feel what others felt, not metaphorically, but physically. A woman he called Miss Miller would step into a room and suddenly clutch her chest when someone nearby grieved. Her stomach twisted with another's shame. Her hands trembled with another's rage. She believed she was gifted. Jung discovered she was haunted. At 6 years old, Miss Miller's mother had fallen into a deep depression. The house fell silent. Her father withdrew, and the little girl made a vow her conscious mind would never remember. If I can feel what she feels, maybe I can fix it. Maybe she'll smile again. It worked for a moment. Each time she mirrored her mother's emotions perfectly, she received a fleeting glance of recognition. "You understand me," her mother said. That sentence became the cornerstone of a lifetime of exhaustion. A whispering belief. I'm loved only when I carry others' pain. If you've ever left a room drained, if you've ever felt guilty for resting, if you've ever attracted people who seem to bleed endlessly onto your shoulder, you already know this contract. You didn't choose it. It chose you when you were too small to say no. Modern neuroscience now echoes what Jung intuited. Studies at UCLA show that children who grow up in emotionally unpredictable homes develop overactive mirror neuron systems. Their brains learn to scan constantly, to anticipate moods, decode microexpressions, sense danger through subtle shifts of tone. It feels like empathy, but it's not. It's hypervigilance wearing compassion's mask. True empathy has boundaries. It knows where you end and they begin. Hypervigilance doesn't. It merges, dissolves, becomes one with every pulse of emotion around it. What Jung called participation mystique, the mystical fusion of self and other. You've lived that fusion. You know what it's like to lose yourself in someone else's storm. To wake up wondering whose sadness you're carrying today. To sense an argument before it begins, already bracing to absorb the blow. And perhaps you've been praised for it. You're so understanding. You're such a good listener. You're my rock. But praise doesn't equal peace. Every compliment became another link in the invisible chain. Jung observed that we mistake our complexes for our identity. The child who learns to regulate a family's emotions doesn't think, I'm playing a role. They think this is who I am. And so you grew up believing that caring meant carrying, that love meant labor, that boundaries were betrayal. Even now, decades later, your nervous system still runs that same survival code. You enter a meeting and instantly scan for tension. You sense a friend's sadness and feel compelled to fix it. You call it compassion. Your body calls it fear. There's a reason it feels impossible to stop. Complexes operate like autonomous programs. They run beneath the surface, independent of will. That's why even after therapy, even after reading every self-help book, you still find yourself pulled toward the wounded, the chaotic, the ones who need saving. You're not broken. You're repeating an ancient script. History offers mirrors for this pattern. Florence Nightingale, born into privilege in 1820, spent her youth tending to a mother consumed by anxiety and a father lost in detachment. As a girl, she discovered that caring for her mother's pain brought brief harmony to the household. That pattern became her destiny. She dedicated her life to service and nearly died from it. Even when bedridden with fever, she worked 16-hour days, unable to rest. She mistook exhaustion for virtue. Sound familiar? Jung would say the complex had consumed her ego. The contract had become her identity. But here's the turning point, and it's one you already feel approaching in your own life. This contract didn't form because you were weak. It formed because you were wise, because your young mind discovered that sensitivity could restore safety. It was your brilliance that saved you. And now, that same brilliance is what will free you. Think back to those childhood moments, the ones you rarely revisit. The slammed doors, the long silences, the sudden laughter after storms. You learned to read those shifts like sacred text. Each mood change was a prophecy, and you became its interpreter. But survival strategies have expiration dates. What once kept you safe now keeps you small. You've probably noticed the pattern. The friend in perpetual crisis, the partner you parent instead of love, the job that demands endless emotional labor. You're not cursed. Your unconscious simply gravitates toward what it recognizes. Chaos feels like home because order once felt dangerous. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's why awareness is the first crack of light. Right now, as you listen, part of you is stirring. The part that knows it's time to stop being everyone's anchor. The part that wonders what it would feel like to exist without scanning the horizon for storms. That curiosity is the beginning of freedom, because you can't heal what you still call normal. And this endless vigilance, this guilt for resting, this exhaustion you wear like a badge, has never been normal. It was training to survive someone else's pain. So here you stand, decades later, heart pounding with empathy that has no off switch. Still believing that if you can just stay kind enough, helpful enough, understanding enough, love will finally feel safe. But love built on obligation isn't love. It's debt, and debt keeps you small. You've spent your life trying to earn what should have been unconditional. And because you earned it through suffering, you keep suffering to prove you're worthy to receive it. That's the loop. The empath is loop, the shadow contract written not in ink, but in nervous system code. Yet beneath that exhaustion, something brighter waits. A strength not born of overgiving, but of inner stillness. A sensitivity that doesn't drown, but discerns. A love that doesn't rescue, but reflects. Jung called this process individuation, the becoming of a whole person. It begins the moment you stop mistaking empathy for self-erasure. The moment you realize that compassion without boundaries isn't compassion at all. It's self-betrayal disguised as virtue. And maybe you're wondering, if I stop carrying everyone else, who will I be? That question is the doorway. Every transformation begins with the death of a false self. You're standing at that threshold now. Pause. Breathe. You don't have to rush this. Wholeness doesn't arrive as revelation. It unfolds as remembering. You are remembering that sensitivity was never meant to be servitude. That empathy, when owned, becomes insight. That presence, when protected, becomes power. The next step begins with awareness, to see the patterns without judgment. Because the moment you see them clearly, they start to loosen. That's where we go next. Into the 6 signs that reveal whether the shadow contract is still running your life, and how awareness can begin to dissolve it. You already feel it stirring, the quiet realization that your exhaustion has a pattern, and patterns, once seen, can be rewritten. Let's bring them into the light. These are the 6 signs that the old contract is still running your life. Not to shame you, but to help you recognize what's been invisible. Because awareness is the beginning of sovereignty. Sign 1. You feel responsible for everyone's emotions. You walk into a room and your body becomes a sensor. Someone frowns, your chest tightens. Someone sighs, your breath catches. Before anyone speaks, you're already editing yourself to calm the atmosphere. You tell yourself it's empathy. But empathy observes, responsibility absorbs. You've been absorbing for so long that neutrality feels cold, almost cruel. Jung called this the inability to differentiate, the loss of clear boundaries between your own emotional field and another's. It began when you were small, when peace at home depended on your ability to read others. Your nervous system learned, if I stay attuned, I stay safe. Now that code runs automatically. The work ahead isn't to stop caring, It's to learn the difference between sensing and carrying. Try this. The next time you feel a sudden wave of tension, pause and name it aloud. Someone is upset. Notice how different that feels from, I'm upsetting someone. That tiny shift begins to dismantle the contract. You are not the custodian of everyone's emotions. You are the witness, not the warehouse. Sign 2. You attract people in perpetual crisis. You've noticed it. The friend who always needs rescuing. The partner who arrives with a tragic past and leaves with your energy. The colleague who somehow turns their chaos into your responsibility. It isn't coincidence. Jung's concept of synchronicity explains it. Our inner patterns magnetize, matching outer circumstances. When your unconscious still whispers, I exist to carry, the world faithfully provides people who need carrying. They sense it without words. Your nervous system broadcasts a frequency. I can hold what you can't. And the world responds. You might call it compassion. Jung would call it participation in a mutual projection. They project helplessness. You project saviorhood. Both stay trapped. Rescuing prevents growth, theirs and yours. When you stop being available as an emotional repository, some people will leave. Let them. Their departure is not rejection, it's recalibration. It makes room for reciprocity, the kind of connection your soul has been craving. Sign 3. Boundaries feel like betrayal. Every time you consider saying no, guilt rises like smoke. You fear that protecting your energy means abandoning someone. That if you stop being endlessly available, love will vanish. This isn't your moral compass speaking. It's the contract tightening its grip. Jung wrote about the ego ideal, the inner image of who you think you must be. Your ego ideal is the helper, the healer, the understanding one. Any deviation triggers what he called shadow guilt, guilt for violating an image, not for doing harm. To break this pattern, practice micro-boundaries. Small, truthful pauses that honor capacity over compulsion. When asked for help, breathe once before you answer. Ask, do I have genuine space for this? Or, am I afraid of disappointing? Each honest no becomes a sacred act of self-trust. Remember, saying no to what depletes you is saying yes to what can nourish you. Sign 4. You confuse exhaustion with virtue. You've been praised for how much you give. You're so dedicated. You never quit. You have such a big heart. You've learned to wear fatigue like a medal of honor. But service without rest becomes self-sacrifice, and self-sacrifice eventually becomes self-erasure. Even Jung, before his own collapse, tried to be everything. Scholar, husband, therapist, visionary. When his psyche rebelled, he described it as the soul demanding allegiance. Your body does the same. Headaches before big commitments. Fatigue that no sleep can cure. A quiet rebellion saying stop. Exhaustion isn't proof of goodness. It's evidence of imbalance. The mature empath, the sovereign one, learns to see rest as sacred because you can't pour light from an empty vessel. Sign 5. You disappear inside relationships. You give easily, receive awkwardly. You're comfortable being the listener, uneasy being the one who needs. When someone offers help, you rush to say, I'm fine. But I'm fine has become the mask that hides your hunger. Healthy connection requires mutual exchange. If you always give and never receive, you create distance, not closeness. Because true intimacy requires vulnerability on both sides. Under the shadow contract, your identity molds itself to others. You become who they need you to be until your own desires fade to static. Ask yourself, what do I actually want? If silence follows, that's not failure. It's the sound of your real self waiting to speak. Integration means relearning your shape, not as reflection, but as presence. Imagine entering a relationship where you no longer disappear, but meet as equal centers of awareness. That's the direction you're moving toward. Sign 6. Your body keeps the score. For years, your body has been whispering what your mouth couldn't say. Tight shoulders from holding the world. A stomach that twists when you agree to things you don't want. Fatigue that descends after emotional labor. Jung saw the body as the stage on which the unconscious performs unspoken truths. Every symptom is a sentence in that language. Psychology now confirms it. Chronic tension, autoimmune flare-ups, migraines, digestive issues often carry emotional roots. Your body isn't betraying you. It's trying to free you. Each pain is a boundary you ignored. Each illness, a message. Something inside needs rest, needs truth. Begin dialoguing with the body. When pain appears, instead of pushing through, ask gently, "What are you trying to tell me?" Then listen, not with analysis, but with presence. The moment you treat your body as ally rather than obstacle, healing begins. You may recognize yourself in all 6 signs or only a few. It doesn't matter. Recognition itself is transformation, because the instant you see the pattern, it loses some of its power. Awareness softens the unconscious grip, and where awareness expands, choice enters. Choice to pause, choice to rest, choice to live without constant emotional debt. You've spent years mastering the language of others' pain. Now, it's time to learn the dialect of your own. The next step is not about withdrawal, it's about integration. Jung called it making the darkness conscious, meeting the exiled parts of yourself that the contract forced you to deny. The anger, the selfishness, the no. In the next chapter, we descend into that inner meeting, the place Jung called the shadow. There, you'll meet the guardian you once exiled and discover that it was never your enemy. It was your strength in disguise. Every transformation begins with descent, a quiet turning inward, away from the noise of explanation, toward the dark interior where truth lives. This is the part Jung called shadow work. Most people hear shadow and imagine evil, anger, danger. But in Jung's language, the shadow isn't wicked. It's simply what we've disowned. All the feelings and instincts we were taught to hide in order to stay loved. You were taught that anger was rude. The need was selfish. That saying no was unkind. So you pushed them down, locking them in the basement of your psyche. And above that basement, you built the persona of the helper, gentle, understanding, endlessly patient. But what's repressed doesn't disappear, it waits. The first descent. Picture yourself standing at the entrance of that inner basement. It smells of dust and old stories. You hear echoes, small, frightened voices saying, "I'm not allowed." These are your shadow fragments. One might carry the anger you swallowed. Another holds the sadness you minimized. Another still cradles your unspoken needs. Jung described this encounter as meeting the personal unconscious. It's uncomfortable because it dismantles the image we've built. But the truth is gentler than the fear. The shadow isn't here to punish you. It's here to return you to wholeness. Take a breath. Imagine stepping inside. You see a small version of yourself, perhaps the age when you first learned to help instead of cry. She looks at you with a mixture of hope and caution. You realize she's not dangerous. She's simply tired of being invisible. Kneel beside her. Say, "I see you." Watch what happens in your body as you speak those words. Maybe your chest loosens. Maybe tears rise. That's the energy of reintegration, the pieces coming home, the forbidden emotions. One of Jung's greatest insights was that every virtue has a shadow. Generosity hides resentment. Peacefulness hides suppressed anger. Compassion hides self-neglect. You can't become whole by polishing only the light parts. You must also meet the energies you've judged. Anger, for example, isn't a flaw, it's information. It tells you when something sacred has been crossed. When you repress it, you lose access to your natural boundaries. Sadness, too, is not weakness. It's the body's way of releasing attachment to what was. You've spent so long holding others that your own grief has nowhere to land. Let land now. You're safe enough to feel it. And selfishness, that word you feared, might actually be the seed of selfhood. To say "I want" is to admit you exist. Without that, your empathy becomes directionless, flooding every shore. Dialoguing with the shadow. Shadow work isn't analysis, it's relationship. You don't interrogate the shadow, you listen to it. You treat it as you would a frightened child. Try this practice. When discomfort arises, jealousy, irritation, fatigue, instead of overriding it, say softly, "Hello, part of me that feels this. What do you need?" Pause. Listen. The answer might not come in words. It might come as an image, a body sensation, a memory. Trust it. Jung used active imagination, a dialogue between conscious and unconscious. He would close his eyes, visualize a scene, and converse with the figures that appeared. These figures weren't fantasies. They were messengers of the psyche. You can do the same, gently, through journaling, art, or quiet reflection. When the shadow speaks, don't rush to fix it. Just witness. Because every part longs first to be seen. The mythic mirror. Jung loved myths because they externalize inner truth. The Greek story of Persephone mirrors the empath's journey. Persephone, the maiden of spring, is taken into the underworld by Hades. Her mother, Demeter, searches endlessly, and the earth falls barren. Only when Persephone learns to navigate both worlds, the light and the dark, does life return a balance. Your descent is the same. You've lived as the caretaker, the bringer of light. Now you descend to meet what was lost below: power, anger, desire, individuality. You're not being punished. You're being initiated, because only those who face their shadow can hold light without burning. Integration begins. As you welcome these exiled parts, something subtle shifts. You stop trying to be only good. You start allowing yourself to be whole. And wholeness feels quieter than you expect. It's not euphoric, it's grounded. You notice you no longer rush to soothe every discomfort around you. You can sit with silence, even tension, without absorbing it. You've begun to differentiate, to know where you end and others begin. This is the root of authentic empathy. True empathy arises from solidity, not from merging. It's the ability to say, "I feel with you, but I remain myself." That's individuation in practice. The shift from survival compassion to conscious compassion. Reclaiming the self. What, then, is the self you're reclaiming? It's not the old identity of helper or healer. It's the original consciousness that existed before the contract. The one that could feel deeply and stay free. Jung described the self as a center, not the ego, but the organizing principle of the whole psyche. When you align with it, you no longer chase validation. You move from a place of quiet authority. You start to notice simple things. The morning light feels kinder. You take deeper breaths without trying. Your relationships begin to reorganize naturally. Some people pull away, others draw closer. You stop taking it personally. You understand its resonance, not rejection. Your frequency is changing, and only those attuned to authenticity will stay. The gift hidden in the shadow. Here lies the paradox. The traits you judged most, sensitivity over feeling intensity, were never flaws. They were raw forms of intuition waiting for boundaries. When you stop using empathy as armor, it becomes guidance. You begin to sense truth without absorbing pain, to perceive undercurrents without drowning in them. You become a mirror that reflects, not a sponge that absorbs. And that, Jung would say, is when the shadow turns to gold. Because the alchemy of healing isn't about changing who you are. It's about reclaiming what you denied. The shadow doesn't vanish. It becomes integrated. It becomes strength with tenderness, clarity with compassion. Pause here. Take a slow breath. You've just crossed the midpoint of your journey. The descent completed, the integration begun. From here, the path rises toward expression, toward living this awareness in the world, at work, in love, in daily choices. That's the essence of Block 4. How to embody the new pattern. How to move from inner awareness to outer alignment. You've met your shadow. Now, you'll learn to walk beside it, not as burden, but as ally. You've met your shadow. You've seen what was hidden, and you didn't look away. That alone changes the vibration of a life. Now comes the practice of embodiment, translating insight into action, awareness into rhythm. Because wisdom that stays in the mind becomes decoration. Only when it moves through the body does it become truth. 1. Slowing the automatic yes. Your new pattern begins with a pause. Every old reflex, the urge to fix, to explain, to smooth tension begins as impulse. If you can slow that impulse by even a breath, the contract loses power. So the first embodiment practice is deceptively simple. Wait one breath longer than your habit before responding. Someone asks for help. Your chest tightens, the body's old alarm. Instead of answering, you breathe once. In that breath, you return a choice. You might still say yes, but now it's conscious. Choice reclaims energy. Automaticity drains it. With time, that breath becomes a doorway. You learn to feel the difference between generosity and obligation, between compassion and compliance. The body knows. It softens with truth and contracts with falsehood. 2. Redefining compassion. For so long, compassion meant carrying. Now it begins to mean witnessing without rescuing. Jung said, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment than the unlived life of the parent. When you overcare, you shield others from meeting their own potential. You take their initiation for them." Real compassion honors another's capacity to grow. It says, "I trust your process, even when it's uncomfortable to watch." This shift feels strange at first. You might mistake detachment for indifference. But detachment is simply space for both souls to breathe. Practice compassionate witnessing. Listen fully, but keep your spine relaxed. Offer presence, not solutions, unless asked. Let silence be part of care. 3. Creating sacred boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're the architecture of intimacy. Without them, love collapses under its own weight. Visualize your energy field as a clear lake. Every time you say yes to something misaligned, a stone drops into the water. Too many stones and the lake muddies. Boundaries are how you keep the water clear. Start small. Decide the hours when you're available. Turn your phone to silent during recovery time. Speak your needs before resentment speaks for you. At first, people may resist, not because you're wrong, but because you've changed the choreography. Hold steady. Consistency teaches others how to meet the new you. Remember, a boundary that requires no defense is the quietest form of power. 4. Rest is alignment. Healing doesn't mean constant productivity. It means learning to rest without guilt. You once equated rest with laziness because stillness threatened your survival pattern. Now rest becomes your declaration of trust. Each moment of genuine rest tells the body, the danger has passed. Turn rest into ritual. A morning walk without the phone. A cup of tea sipped slowly. 5 minutes of silence before sleep. Rest is not escape. It's integration time. When insights settle into the nervous system. Without rest, transformation stays theoretical. 5. Practicing embodied presence. Presence is the nervous system in harmony with the moment. To live the new pattern, anchor it in the body. Throughout your day, ask, where am I in my body right now? Are your shoulders raised? Is your breath shallow? Bring awareness there. Let the breath deepen until you feel weight in your feet. When grounded, empathy becomes clear perception instead of absorption. You sense emotions around you, but they move through like wind through trees, rustling, not uprooting. 6. Living from center instead of edges. The old pattern lived at the edges, constantly scanning, leaning forward, anticipating. Living from center feels different, steady, responsive, never rushed. Imagine a circle within your chest, luminous, calm. Every time you feel pulled outward by someone's need, visualize returning to that circle. From there, speak, act, decide. Jung described individuation as the ego's alignment with the self. Living from center is that alignment in motion. You still care, but not compulsively. You still help, but not at your own expense. 7. Relationships in the new pattern. As you embody boundaries, some relationships recalibrate. The ones based on your self-erasure may fade. The ones based on authenticity deepen. Let this restructuring happen naturally. You'll find yourself drawn to people who take responsibility for their own emotions. Conversations feel lighter, laughter easier. Mutual respect replaces silent expectation. If loneliness arises between chapters, treat it as fertile ground. Empty space is where new resonance grows. This is how life reorganizes around your wholeness. 8. Service from overflow. You were born to give. That hasn't changed. What changes is the source. Before, giving came from depletion. Now it flows from overflow. When your own cup is full, service becomes joy, not duty. You begin to share wisdom instead of rescuing. You inspire without overextending. This is mature empathy, compassionate, discerning, sustainable. 9. Daily integration ritual. Integration is sustained by rhythm. Try a simple end-of-day reflection. Ask, where did I stay connected to myself today? Ask, where did I lose myself? Offer gratitude for both. Awareness is the victory. Write one sentence you wish to remember tomorrow. Close the notebook. Exhale. Over time, these small acknowledgments weave new neural pathways. What was once survival becomes self-leadership. You may notice a subtle grace entering ordinary moments. An ease that doesn't need applause. That's embodiment. The empath who once absorbed the world now moves through it as calm witness. You sense suffering without collapsing into it. You speak truth without trembling. This is what Jung meant by the reconciliation of opposites. Feeling deeply while staying free. Pause. Feel the stillness gathering around you. That stillness isn't emptiness, it's presence. The contract has loosened. You no longer seek permission to exist. The next, final block completes the arc. How to sustain this awareness through the seasons of life. How to embody love without losing self. And how the empath becomes the teacher of balance for others. You've descended. You've faced the shadow. You've reclaimed what was exiled. Now, the journey arcs upward, toward integration, toward living the wisdom you've uncovered. This is where the empath's light becomes sovereign. Not fragile, not scattered, but radiant, focused, and sustainable. Sovereignty through awareness. Integration begins with awareness as your compass. You notice when old reflexes arise. A sense of obligation instead of choice. A pull towards someone else's pain instead of presence. A subtle shrinking of your own desires. Catch it, name it, breathe through it. Your nervous system learns a new language. Presence over absorption. Boundaries over collapse. Self over compulsion. With each repetition, awareness becomes habit. And habit becomes identity. Embodied freedom. You no longer apologize for stillness. You no longer over-explain your boundaries. You no longer confuse giving with surrender. Imagine your body as a temple, not a tool. Your energy is sacred, not disposable. Your attention is intentional, not scattered. This is embodied freedom. You exist fully in your own skin, rooted, grounded, anchored, even as life pulls in countless directions. You can move through relationships with clarity, offer presence without overextension, and allow others to own their own process. Relationships rebalanced. As a shadow contract dissolves, relationships naturally recalibrate. The friends who only demanded energy drift away. The connections built on mutual growth deepen. The love you give becomes reciprocal. Your presence is no longer a warehouse for others' pain. It's a lighthouse, illuminating possibility without carrying the storm. And paradoxically, people notice this immediately. Your clarity, calm, and boundaries attract what you truly need. Your life begins to echo authenticity. Work, creativity, and purpose. Integration doesn't stop at emotion. The energy previously consumed by unconscious labor now flows toward creation, toward impact. Projects you delayed because your attention was drained begin to emerge. Your work feels aligned, not forced. Ideas flow because the nervous system is calm enough to perceive patterns instead of absorbing chaos. Your sensitivity, once a liability, becomes a superpower. You read subtleties others miss. You anticipate needs without controlling outcomes. You inspire growth because you're no longer dependent on validation. The empath as the integrated guide. Jung described the guide archetype, the person who has traversed the underworld and returned with maps. You have walked through your own inner labyrinth. You've faced exhaustion, guilt, compulsion, and fear. You've confronted the shadow and reclaimed your sovereignty. Now your presence itself is transformative. Not by fixing, not by rescuing, not by absorbing, but by embodying wholeness. You reflect possibilities. You invite courage. You mirror integrity. This is conscious empathy. Empathy with eyes open. Love without loss of self. A life of wholeness. Wholeness is not a destination. It's a practice. It shows up in small, consistent ways. Saying no without apology. Resting without guilt. Speaking truth without fear. Feeling fully without collapse. Serving from abundance, not depletion. Every choice you make aligns you with the self, rather than the old survival contract. Each boundary you honor strengthens the pattern. Each insight integrated reinforces sovereignty. Life begins to feel lighter, deeper, richer. You're no longer a ghost in your own story. You're the author, the final truth. Your empathy was never the problem. The contract was. Sensitivity, once integrated, becomes precision. Compassion, once embodied, becomes influence. Your light no longer burns you. It guides others. You don't rescue anymore. You illuminate. You no longer collapse under responsibility. You stand steady in truth. Your presence is a map for those still lost in the old patterns. And here is the ultimate insight. The shadow, once feared, now serves. The pain that once enslaved you now teaches. The traits once repressed now fuel authenticity. You are whole, not half a person performing goodness, not a martyr disguised as helper. Whole, complete, sovereign, the path forward. This is your invitation to continue choosing yourself, to continue speaking your truth, to live as the integrated guide. The shadow contract ends the moment you see it. Integration begins the moment you reclaim yourself. Transformation completes the moment choosing your wholeness becomes as natural as breathing. Your light was never meant to be currency. It was always meant to illuminate. Your life was never meant to be borrowed. It was always meant to be yours. And now it is